Theresa May has warned MPs that rejecting her Brexit deal in a vote tomorrow would lead to paralysis in Parliament and endanger Britain's departure from the European Union. The EU has written to Mrs May offering assurances on the Irish backstop, but the Democratic Unionist Party said the letter only increased their concerns. Ministers have set out what they call ambitious plans to reduce air pollution. Environmental campaigners say the targets are too vague. The husband of the British Iranian woman in jail in Tehran has revealed that she's been under pressure to spy for Iran. Roads have been blocked with burning tyres in Zimbabwe after the president more than doubled the price of fuel. Also tonight, if this was my last match, it was an amazing way to end. Andy Murray on his first round defeat at the Australian Open. On the eve of her showdown with MPs on her Brexit deal, the Prime Minister has ramped up her central message that it would be dangerous for the Commons to reject the agreement. This morning, Theresa May travelled to a factory in Stoke-on-Trent, where 2.5 years ago, nearly 70% of the population voted to leave the European Union. She warned that if MPs didn't back her, they would be behaving recklessly. Either the UK would leave without a deal, or they'd betray the vote of the British people, causing catastrophic harm to faith in democracy.
While no deal remains a serious risk, having observed events at Westminster over the last 7 days, it's now my judgment that the more likely outcome is a paralysis in Parliament that risks there being no Brexit.
The Prime Minister said a letter published by the EU contained valuable new assurances about the withdrawal agreement. It stresses that Brussels does not want to use the so-called Irish backstop, which is designed to guarantee there will be no return to a hard border in Ireland. This afternoon in the Commons, Mrs May urged opponents of the deal to give it a second look, arguing that it would protect the economy while delivering on the result of the referendum. But her usual allies, the Democratic Unionists, have made it clear they haven't been won round, and few of her Tory critics have indicated that they've been persuaded. A government whip, Gareth Johnson, has resigned to oppose the agreement. Our assistant political editor, Norman Smith, reports from Westminster.
The view, even among the Prime Minister's supporters, is that her deal will tomorrow be resoundingly defeated. Significantly, the Prime Minister herself, when asked, was unable to say she believed she would win, while her International Trade Secretary Liam Fox publicly conceded victory was now unlikely. Number 10, however, is desperate to reduce the scale of any defeat. To that end, the Prime Minister warned Leave-supporting MPs that if they rejected her deal, the likely outcome was no Brexit. She also hailed the reassurances offered by the EU on the Northern Ireland backstop, even though they're not legally binding. Under them, it was confirmed the backstop was intended to be temporary and the EU would seek to bring it to an end expeditiously. And in the Commons, the Prime Minister made this appeal to MPs.
People will look at the decision of this House tomorrow and ask, did we deliver on the country's vote to leave the European Union? Did we safeguard our economy, our security and our union? Or did we let the British people down?
However, the Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn, who is himself under huge pressure to table a no-confidence motion in the government, was dismissive of the reassurances secured by Mrs May.
Today's letter is nothing more than a repetition of exactly the same position that was pulled more than 1 month ago. It categorically does not give the legal assurances this House was promised and contains nothing but warm words and aspirations.
A view echoed by the Deputy Leader of the DUP, Nigel Dodds.
5 weeks since the Prime Minister pulled the vote saying that there had to be legally binding assurance, will she admit that nothing has fundamentally changed? I mean, that's the reality. Let's not kid ourselves about that.
And regardless of the arguments over the backstop, some leading Brexiteers signalled they'd vote against Mrs May's deal for other reasons. The Conservative MP John Redwood.
Given that the EU intends to take huge sums of money and powers off us in return for just 21 or 45 months of more talks and massive uncertainty, why should we ever believe the EU would give us a good deal when they pocket all that they want up front?
Meanwhile, there are clear signs of MPs seeking to give Parliament a greater say in shaping a different Brexit deal. It seems, however, whatever the opposition Mrs May is facing, none of those putting forward any alternatives is any better place to command a majority.
In the corridors, offices and tea rooms outside the Commons chamber, the manoeuvrings have been intensifying. With the issue of Brexit cutting hard across traditional party lines and profound uncertainty about what lies ahead, MPs are trying to work out what might follow defeat for the Prime Minister. Our political correspondent, Alex Forsyth, has been considering some of the possible scenarios.
As has been the case of late, parliamentary procedure could hugely influence how things play out tomorrow and beyond. Several MPs from all parties have tabled amendments, suggested changes to the Prime Minister's agreement, which will be voted on before the deal itself. The Speaker, John Bercow, whose role in the Brexit process has already proved contentious, will decide which of these will be put to the Commons. Then, once the debate's finished tomorrow evening, MPs will vote on the amendments he's selected in the order he's chosen. The one being most closely watched is from the Labour MP Hilary Benn. It rejects the Prime Minister's deal and a no-deal Brexit. If it's chosen and the Commons backs it, it's likely the meaningful vote would not go ahead because MPs would technically have already rejected Theresa May's agreement. If not, then the crucial vote will happen. And with a defeat widely expected, much focus is on what might come next. Officially, the Prime Minister would have 3 days to signal her intention to Parliament, and Downing Street has indicated there wouldn't be a huge delay. A significant defeat could prompt the Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, to call a vote of no confidence in the government in the hope of triggering a general election. In the meantime, backbench MPs could try to influence the process. The Conservative Nick Bowles has suggested MPs could wrest control from the government, with backbench committee chairmen coming up with their own Brexit plan.
If the liaison committee comes forward with a plan, only if the Commons supports it in a way that it will not have done with the Prime Minister's deal by that point, then the government will be instructed to implement it. We live in a parliamentary democracy. MPs were elected in 2017, fully a year after the referendum. If we don't trust our elected parliament to come up with a solution, who do we trust?
Others from different parties are pursuing a second referendum, believing a parliamentary defeat would signal deadlock that only a public vote could break. Among them, the Conservative MP Dominic Grieve.
If people by majority still want to go, then go we must. And I'll just accept that's the end of it. What I can't accept is that, seeing the mess into which we've now got ourselves, we should simply think that the easy way out is to leave in one way or another, when everything suggests it's going to be a bad outcome. And if people want something, then I think we ought to go back to them and say, could you please confirm this is what you want?
Meanwhile, Brexiteers point out that as things stand, by law, if the Prime Minister's deal is defeated and no alternative is agreed, then the UK will leave the EU come the end of March without a deal in place. The only certainty in this complex Brexit maze is that no one can predict with any confidence what will actually happen over the next few crucial days.
The leader of the SNP at Westminster, Ian Blackford, told the Commons that Theresa May had continued to ignore Scotland's voice and Scotland's interest in the Brexit debate. He said it was time for another referendum.
Why is the Prime Minister so petrified of allowing the people decide? Now we know the facts. And if she's not, will she now do the right thing? Extend Article 50. Let the people decide.
One of the amendments to Theresa May's deal has been tabled by the Conservative chairman of the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee, Andrew Morrison. His measure would add an expiry date to the controversial Irish backstop. An amendment, he believes, could make the agreement acceptable to a majority in the Commons.
I think it would be an expression of the will of the House, so the EU would then see what was achievable. So if, as seems likely, the Prime Minister is defeated tomorrow, she will be able to go back to the European Union and say, look guys, we haven't been able to get this across the line, but it's clearly the opinion of the House that the problem is this backstop. Can we do something about it, please?
Another Conservative Eurosceptic MP who says he will be backing Theresa May's deal is Sir Edward Lee. Speaking on The World at One, he said the EU would be under no pressure to offer concessions if the agreement was defeated by a heavy margin tomorrow.
Some of my Brexiteer colleagues have said they want to obey their conscience, if you like, and vote against it tomorrow, and they think she'll come back next week and get a few more concessions. What worries me is if she loses by over 100, the EU might offer her nothing, and the Remainers might take control completely.
Our Europe editor Katja Adler assesses how the political drama at Westminster is being viewed in Brussels and other EU capitals.
Underlying the pages of EU assurances on the Brexit deal is arguably Brussels' real message, one echoing the Prime Minister's own, that their negotiated agreement is the only divorce deal on offer to the UK, full stop, end of story. EU leaders want to keep up the pressure on MPs to focus on the cold facts, that the deal on the table is the compromise result of 2 years of difficult negotiations between the EU and the UK government, built around the Prime Minister's red lines, leaving the EU's single market and customs union. But Europe will be following tomorrow's vote very closely. Will the deal be voted down, and if so, by how many? It's then and only then that the internal debate in EU circles will begin as to what happens next. The EU is unlikely to make any significant moves until the direction in which Parliament is going becomes clear. It'll want to see MPs uniting around one single amendment or clear alternative to Theresa May's deal. EU leaders hope to avoid a chaotic and costly no-deal Brexit, and there may be more wriggle room than they've wanted to admit even to each other until now, though there would be limits.
Environment and health campaigners have given a broad welcome to government proposals to reduce air pollution. Key elements of the plan include limiting emissions of ammonia from fertilisers used in farming and a ban on the most polluting wood-burning stoves. Ministers say the measures will halve the number of people breathing in harmful particles by 2025. But critics say they lack detail and deadlines. Our science editor David Shookman has been looking at the proposals.
Over the past few decades, Britain's air has improved dramatically. But one kind of pollution, nitrogen dioxide, is still at levels judged illegal by the European Union. Ministers are being far more outspoken than usual in recognising the dangers and the burden they pose on the health service. Michael Gove, the Environment Secretary, has published plans for England that will have implications across the UK.
At the moment, our air quality is damaging the health of thousands. So we need to take action, and that action has to cover everything from making sure that we reduce the roadside emissions that come from vehicles to making sure that the emissions that come from how we burn wood and coal, and also how our farmers farm, are reduced. It's critical to making sure that our nation is healthier and our environment is purer.
Wood-burning stoves are a target. Every hour they're in use, each one can produce more pollution particles than a diesel lorry. The problem is worst when the logs are wet, because the moisture makes them smoke and smoulder, releasing more dangerous air pollutants. But mindful of the popularity of stoves, with householders like Michelle Beat in Bristol, the government has stopped short of a ban.
I totally understand the need to restrain or try to protect the environment, so we try and use, obviously, logs that are seasoned, but I wouldn't be happy if I wasn't able to use it.
Another major source is traffic, and the government has told local councils to come up with plans for clean air zones. But some of them say they need more support to do that. James Lewis is Deputy Leader of Leeds City Council.
Very frustrating for us, and the government, despite the fact that all the work we've done is based on our best assessment of what we need to support it, the government aren't actually coming forward with the funding that we think is needed.
The key question is whether any of the government's measures will help. Research has shown that the growth of lung capacity can be stunted by air pollution. Professor Chris Griffiths, who's leading the work, says the government's plans don't do enough to encourage electric vehicles.
The document talks about an infrastructure, but again, there's no target. It says, we will provide more charging points, but we don't know by when that will be achieved. So, will this strategy transform our congested, polluted inner cities and towns? As it stands, no, it won't.
The more research is carried out, the more scientists worry about air pollution. The issue now is whether enough is done to head off the worst impacts.
The husband of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, the British-Iranian woman who's in jail in Tehran, has said interrogators tried to pressure his wife into spying for Iran. Richard Ratcliffe was speaking as his wife began a hunger strike in protest at being denied medical treatment. The Foreign Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, has described her ongoing detention as totally unacceptable. Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe has always denied the charges against her. Here's our correspondent, Caroline Hawley.
Richard Ratcliffe says this is a high-stakes moment for his wife. He says she's in fragile health after more than 1,000 days in jail and has suffered in captivity from depression and panic attacks, as well as neurological problems and lumps in her breasts. She's demanding written confirmation that she'll be able to have specialist medical care. Mr Ratcliffe has also revealed that Iran's Revolutionary Guards tried last month to get her to spy on the UK government, in particular on the Department for International Development. It was that, he says, that pushed her over the edge.
She was stunned and terrified, and they said, listen, it will be safer for you and for your family afterwards if you cooperate with us. So it felt like a real attempt to assert power and assert menace, if I'm honest.
This afternoon, the Foreign Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, summoned the Iranian ambassador, delivering what officials have described as a tough message to Iran, warning of consequences if Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe doesn't get the medical treatment she needs. Mr Hunt said it was a truly terrible indictment that she'd had to resort to a hunger strike. But Iran has already hit back, with the ambassador quoted as saying that interference by the British government is unacceptable and won't help her.
You're listening to the 6 o'clock news on BBC Radio 4. The main news so far. At the start of what she's called a crucial week for the country, Theresa May has been trying to persuade MPs to back her Brexit deal. But Labour and the DUP have rejected fresh assurances from the EU. Still to come. The first recording of music written by the acclaimed concert pianist Harriet Cohen. Tear gas has been used against protesters in Zimbabwe who've taken to the streets after it was announced that fuel prices would more than double. President Emerson Mnangagwa has insisted the measure is necessary to deal with chronic fuel shortages, but critics say it's an insensitive and provocative move which could spark a humanitarian crisis. Our correspondent Shingai Nyoka sent this report from the capital Harare.
The anger and frustration was clear as demonstrators made their views on the price hike known. Many blocked roads in the capital's townships with boulders and burning tires. A police vehicle was pelted with rocks as the protesters marched towards the city centre, seeking an audience with authorities.
He must leave because we are tired, we are hungry. We are protesting because it comes to a time where things are now hitting. You see, people are suffering. You must care and you must listen to the people. You must be up, not above the people. You must listen always.
In the south, in Zimbabwe's second city, Bulawayo, police fired tear gas on the crowds in what are the worst protests since Emerson Mnangagwa was sworn into office last August. Zimbabwe's economy has struggled for more than a decade, the legacy of a financial collapse during the Mugabe era. President Mnangagwa says the severe fuel shortages have been caused by rampant illegal trading and increased consumption. He insists he's been forced to act and has promised special measures to help poorly paid government workers. But the opposition movement for democratic change has condemned the move, warning it could prompt a humanitarian crisis. President Mnangagwa is currently abroad, visiting Russia and Asia. Many here believe he should be focusing on issues at home instead.
Turkey has said it will not be deterred by a threat from President Trump to devastate its economy if it attacks Kurdish forces in northern Syria. There's been increasing uncertainty in the region after Mr. Trump's decision last month to withdraw American troops from the area, where they've been fighting Islamic State militants alongside the Kurds. The president has now called for the creation of a 20-mile safe zone in northern Syria that would prevent a new conflict. Our World Affairs correspondent Jonathan Marcus reports.
Relations between Ankara and Washington had been slowly improving, but President Trump's threatening tweet appears to have changed all that. His precipitate decision to pull US ground troops out of Syria has left both friends and enemies in the region uncertain, none more so than America's Kurdish allies in northeastern Syria. Mr. Trump's warning to devastate the Turkish economy if they attack the Kurds seems to have come out of the blue. Asked about it during his visit to Saudi Arabia, the US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo clearly had little to add.
I'd have to ask him. We've applied sanctions in many places around the world. I assume he's speaking about those kinds of things, but you'd have to ask him the details.
The threat has not gone down well in Turkey. The Turkish lira suffered a tremor. Nonetheless, Turkey's Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu, while noting that strategic partners and allies did not hold discussions via Twitter, said that Ankara did not totally oppose Mr. Trump's suggestion for some kind of security zone.
They had been saying that it's impossible to defend such area from the air, and they used various excuses not to support this idea of ours. Now, as they see Turkey's determination, they've made this proposal. Turkey is not against it. But our problem is a terror corridor along our border and a terrorist organization trying to divide Syria. That terrorist group is a threat to us and will target it.
Turkey's opposition to the Kurds is implacable. Mr. Trump's safety zone raises many questions. Who will monitor it? And most importantly, who will take action if it is breached? The whole policy-making process in Washington seems impulsive and ill-considered, with clear tensions not just between the US and Turkey, but between Mr. Trump and his own national security advisor, John Bolton, who has tried to place conditions on the president's withdrawal plan.
Newspapers in France have published an open letter by President Emmanuel Macron proposing a national debate over the next 8 weeks. It's Mr. Macron's latest attempt to end nearly 2 months of disruptive and sometimes violent yellow vest protests. He's pledged that there are to be no forbidden questions. But at the same time, he's ruled out discussions on bringing back the death penalty, banning abortion, or ending the right to seek asylum. From Paris, Hugh Schofield reports.
President Macron's letter to the French is the starting whistle for a 2-month national consultation, the actual conduct of which is still something of a mystery. What he hopes is that across the country, individuals, but more likely mayors of towns and villages and other people of influence, will chair local debates, allowing certain themes and recommendations to emerge, which will then be passed up to government. The president details what kinds of question he thinks the people should be discussing. Should taxes be lower? And if so, what social services would people be prepared to sacrifice? How can citizens be more closely associated with decision-making, perhaps by greater use of referendums? Or, and this is a controversial one, should there be annual immigration quotas fixed by Parliament? The overall aim is to lower tensions given expression in the Yellow Vest protests, but also perhaps to find a new way of running democracy in the social media age. The big question is what happens if the people give answers that the president doesn't want to hear. Might he, by raising then dashing Yellow Vest expectations, create a situation more explosive than what he had before?
Detectives investigating historic allegations of child sex abuse in West Yorkshire have arrested 55 men over the past few months. The investigation centres on claims made by 7 women that they were assaulted as children between 2002 and 2009. The alleged assaults are said to have taken place predominantly in the Dewsbury and Batley areas. The Japanese car maker Toyota has started producing its new Corolla hybrid model at Burnaston in Derbyshire. The company, which employs around 3,000 people in the UK, plans to export the new car throughout Europe. The chief executive of Toyota Motor Europe, John van Sale, said it was vital that trade with the EU remained free and frictionless. He was speaking at a ceremony to mark the beginning of production, as our business correspondent Theo Leggett reports.
Ladies and gentlemen, what a fantastic car!
It was a moment Toyota wanted to celebrate. The Japanese firm has begun building a brand new version of its best-selling Corolla model at its Burnaston plant, using a state-of-the-art manufacturing process. It spent £240 million upgrading the factory in preparation. But Toyota has previously emphasised that leaving the EU without a deal could seriously disrupt production at the plant, and that any extra costs resulting from new customs duties or formalities could affect its future investment decisions. Today, the company reiterated that warning, while throwing its weight behind the Prime Minister's deal. Its European chief executive, Johan van Zyl, said that competitiveness was hard-won, but easily lost.
If we would put any friction or any tariffs into the system, that will have an impact on our cost, and that will have an impact on our competitiveness. So with a deal like that, we can achieve and maintain our competitiveness.
Other car makers have already begun preparing for a possible no-deal Brexit. BMW plans to stop production at its mini plant near Oxford in April, in case the supply of parts is disrupted by new border controls. Honda says it'll close its Swindon plant for 6 days for the same reason. PSA Group, which owns Vauxhall, has warned that leaving the EU without a deal could have dramatic consequences for its 2 factories in the UK.
Chinese exports have suffered their biggest decline in 2 years as a trade war with the United States continues. They fell by nearly 4.5% in December compared with the same period the previous year. In the city, the 100 share index ended the day 63 points lower at 6,855. On Wall Street, a short time ago, the Dow Jones was down 59 points at 23,936. On the currency markets, the pound is up 0.7 cents against the dollar at $1.29. And against the euro, sterling is up half of 1 cent at €1.12.4. And that makes a euro worth 89 pence. Andy Murray has produced a battling performance in what could be his final match at an Australian Open and in his professional career. He was beaten by the Spanish player Roberto Bautista Agut, but pushed him to 5 sets despite being visibly in pain from the hip injury that has forced him to announce his imminent retirement. Our sports news correspondent Andy Swiss was watching.
And from Great Britain, make some noise for Andy Murray!
So would this be the final bow? Andy Murray emerged to a wave of sentimental support, but limited expectations, and at first they seemed largely justified, as Roberto Bautista Agut took the first 2 sets. Murray, though, was increasing in confidence, and roared on by his watching family, he launched a thrilling comeback, winning 2 tie-breaks to set up a deciding set. Finally, his hip injury seemed to take its toll, and Bautista Agut eased to victory. But this was a performance full of Murray's familiar grace and grit, and as he struggled to control his emotions afterwards, he did offer a glimmer of hope.
If this was my last match, like you say, amazing way to end. I gave literally everything I had. If I want to go again, I'll need to have like a big operation, which there's no guarantees I'll be able to come back from anyway, but you know, I'll give it my best shot, and thank you. Thanks again. Cheers.
Murray later explained he would either rest until a final appearance at Wimbledon, or he would have more surgery, which will improve his quality of life, but which could prevent him from ever playing again. He said he would make his decision in the next week, but if this was his last match, it was a fitting goodbye. A player renowned for his resilience, fighting right to the very finish.
The manager of the Premier League's bottom club, Huddersfield Town, has left his post. David Wagner had been in charge for 4 years and guided the team into the top flight for the first time since 1972. The name Harriet Cohen may not be immediately familiar to many, but in the 1920s and 30s she was one of Britain's leading concert pianists. She inspired composers including Elgar, Vaughan Williams and her lover Sir Arnold Bax. She also composed music herself, yet 50 years since her death she remains largely forgotten. Now 4 of her compositions have been recorded for the first time. Our arts correspondent Rebecca Jones has been listening.
Lively and lyrical. This is one of Harriet Cohen's 4 Russian impressions, recorded for the first time since she wrote them more than 100 years ago. Harriet Cohen was an accomplished concert pianist, but she was also a bewitching beauty, admired by men from Albert Einstein to D.H. Lawrence. For 4 decades, she had a passionate, if turbulent, relationship with the composer Sir Arnold Bax, inspiring many of his compositions, including Tintagel. She once said she saw music as a form of communication.
Music is a sort of speech. You're talking, you're telling in a new, strange language.
But as a composer, Harriet Cohen has been largely overlooked. The pianist Mark Bebbington, who's recorded her music, thinks she's been unfairly neglected.
We know of other female composers who were also sidelined because of their gender. To have been a successful female concert pianist would have been acceptable, but to be a successful female composer would have required so many extra hurdles for her to have gone over.
Mark Bebbington hopes recording her music will bring Harriet Cohen to wider prominence. But while it's known she did compose many other works, those scores are all lost.
The headlines again. The Prime Minister has warned of paralysis in Parliament and a risk of there being no Brexit if MPs vote down her withdrawal deal tomorrow. But the Democratic Unionists and many Conservative Brexiteers have made it clear they haven't been won round by a letter from the EU stressing it doesn't want to use the so-called Irish backstop. The government has set out proposals to reduce air pollution, but critics say the plans lack detail. The husband of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, the British-Iranian woman who's in jail in Tehran, has said interrogators tried to pressure his wife into spying for Iran. Tear gas has been used against protesters in Zimbabwe who've taken to the streets after the president doubled the price of fuel. BBC News.